Beneath the sterile glow of office lights, buried under piles of strangers' resumes and extinguished emotions, he wore the mask of a devoted father, loyal husband, and successful executive. But every word, every glance was calculated, measured, refined to precision. While everyone saw him as the victim, he was orchestrating a years-long chess game where every person became a pawn: his wife, his children, even his own parents. Affairs, DNA tests, hidden cameras, lawyers, fake police calls, all for one goal: not just to win, but to destroy. And when the web of lies finally unraveled, one thing became clear. There were no innocents in this drama. This wasn't about love or betrayal. It was about power, about the sweet taste of revenge that no amount of scrubbing could wash away. Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends or family. It really helps my channel a lot. Please tell me in which city or country you watch this video. I value every one of your comments. So, let's get started. Late on a Friday night, I found myself alone in my office, my eyes fixed on a framed photo that sat on the corner of my desk. It showed a younger version of me, back when I still wore the title of regional manager at a chemical company with pride, standing beside my wife, Gabrielle, and our 3 kids, during a time when they still believed I was someone worth admiring. Under the sterile brightness of fluorescent lights, the image now seemed drenched in a cruel, cutting irony. I was buried under a sea of resumes, tasked with hiring 2 replacements for the women who had recently resigned after their husbands climbed the corporate ladder. Normally, it would have been just another boring responsibility. But with my personal life steadily crumbling, or more accurately, with me quietly dismantling it, the task felt heavier, more charged. The obvious choices among the applicants stood out, but tampering with people's futures had evolved into a private, guilty pleasure of mine. I was deep in my work when Kendra, my executive assistant, appeared at the doorway, tapping lightly against the frame. "Ethan," she said, "all 8 candidates are locked in for Monday's interviews. Is there anything else you need before I head out?" I glanced up and offered her the warm, practiced smile that had become my trademark, a carefully polished performance. "That'll be all." "Have a good night," I said softly. She looked almost visibly relieved to leave, as though some unseen heaviness hung around me. After she disappeared down the hall, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Every Thursday, I made trips out of state, checking in with my sales reps, holding meetings into Friday afternoons before making my way back home. Gabrielle, in turn, had her established Thursday ritual, a night out with her friends. For over 15 years, this arrangement had worked, easy and unchallenged. I relished the empty highways, the silence of my car, the fiction of being in control. Meanwhile, Gabrielle ruled the household as she saw fit, unbothered by my absence. I always told myself I needed the time to reflect. But the truth was uglier. I fed off the autonomy, the rush of being untouchable on the open road. Gabrielle worked as an executive assistant to the district attorney, though she was soon transitioning to a federal appointment. Smart, perhaps dangerously so, and striking, with blonde hair and a body that seemed to draw the gaze of every man she passed. Early in our marriage, just being near her had felt like an accomplishment. Over 20 years later, the awe had withered into something darker, a craving to manipulate, to control outcomes from behind the scenes, to test the limits of people's resilience. When her parents volunteered to take our kids every other weekend to give us couple time, we went through the motions, pretending it repaired anything. Secretly, I treasured those weekends for the freedom they offered, to sharpen my subtle games. With each passing year, it became undeniable. I lived for the quiet power of unseen influence. That particular Friday, when I finally got home, it was late. Gabrielle stood in the kitchen, looking composed, dressed neatly, sipping from a teacup. She barely looked up. "Get those interviews set?" she asked, her voice clipped and devoid of affection. "We need solid hires, or the whole place will fall apart. Everything's lined up for Monday, I said, feeling a flicker of annoyance at her detached demeanor. I lingered, studying her. She exuded the cold confidence of a predator observing prey, only I was no prey. Recently, we'd taken a family trip to the Grand Ole Opry, one of Gabrielle's latest efforts to paint a facade of unity. On the drive home, we made a pit stop at Lambert's Cafe, known for tossing bread rolls through the dining area. The kids had laughed uncontrollably. I, meanwhile, found it all irritating: subpar food, cramped seating, and an exhausting crowd. Later, in the SUV, Gabrielle turned off the radio, an unmistakable signal she wanted a serious conversation. Anticipating the tension, I subtly slipped a miniature recorder from my jacket and flicked it on, careful to hide it. Years of practice had made me expert at capturing conversations undetected. "What's on your mind?" I asked, infusing my voice with a studied tenderness. She stared straight ahead, her mouth set in a tight line. "Ethan," she began, voice level, "have you ever seriously thought about cheating on me? Actually considered it?" The question caught me off guard, though I didn't let it show. "And why," I said slowly, "would you ask something like that?" She kept her eyes on the road, her grip on the wheel tightening. "Because sometimes it feels like we're stuck. Like marriage doesn't mean what it used to. The world's different now. Maybe if one of us stepped outside, it would clear the air." My mind raced. Was this some trap? Truthfully, I had entertained the idea, but had never acted on it. Crossing that line would risk toppling the carefully managed empire I'd built. And deep down, I suspected Gabrielle had her own hidden sins. No evidence, just a gnawing instinct. I composed my face into one of sober reflection. "I appreciate your honesty," I said eventually. "But no, I've never crossed that line. I still believe in loyalty," I added, intentionally layering my voice with righteousness, hoping to force her into guilt, to remind her who still upheld the moral high ground. Her nostrils flared slightly, but she remained silent for a long moment. Finally, in a flat voice, she said, "I think you should do it. Actually, I'd support you, if that's what it would take to make you happy." I gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Gabrielle, since when is integrity optional for you?" Her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. People change. They get restless. Maybe I'm restless enough to want something different. I turned toward the window, thinking, she's setting the stage. She wants permission to justify whatever betrayal she's already decided to commit. A sudden shift took place in my mind. The balance of control between us tipped decisively. It was clear I needed to watch her far more closely. We spent the next hour on the road, wrapped in an awkward, strained quiet. Twice she stretched her hand toward the radio, as if intending to break the silence, only to withdraw it both times. In the end, she brushed off her odd suggestion by blaming an overindulgence in romance novels. That excuse rang hollow. Gabrielle loathed romance fiction. When we finally arrived back at the house, we found my parents already settled in, looking after our 3 kids. As I unloaded the trunk, my father approached me quietly. "Ethan," he said under his breath, "I need a private word. Your mother and I found out something about Gabrielle and Aubrey. She's keeping an eye on us. When can we talk?" I gave an easy shrug, careful to sound casual. "Tomorrow at the office," I said loudly enough for Gabrielle to hear. "I'll help you with that cabinet you mentioned." He gave me a subtle nod and drifted away. When I turned around, Gabrielle was standing at the front door, arms crossed tightly, her piercing blue eyes locked on me. "Plans for tomorrow?" she asked with a cool edge. I forced a chuckle and a casual smile. "You heard me. Dad's got a small repair project. I'll be working late, but I'll take care of dinner too," I added lightly. She offered a thin smile and moved aside to let me in. The atmosphere inside was heavy, thick with unspoken doubts. Our children, Alyssa, our eldest, Elliot, our only son, and little Aubrey, were cheerfully chatting with my mother, completely unaware of the tension swirling around them. As I watched them, a strange, almost eager anticipation stirred in me. She had been hiding things, and now so was I. The following morning, my parents arrived at my office. We locked the door behind them to ensure privacy. Kendra brought in a tray of coffee, then quietly slipped away. My father cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Ethan, I'm sorry about this," he began. "Remember a few months back when I joked about buying those DNA kits for the grandkids and sending them off to Ancestry.com? I sat up straighter, my muscles tensing. "Yeah, I remember," I replied. He let out a long, weary sigh. "Well, the results came in for Aubrey. A woman named Beatrice Smith reached out. She claims she's Aubrey's biological grandmother." He paused, letting the words settle. "She says she's searching for her son, Aubrey's biological father, and wants to meet the family." My heart pounded painfully against my ribs. "That's impossible," I said under my breath. But deep down, I wasn't sure. Maybe it was possible. If Gabrielle had been keeping secrets, or worse, this might be the proof. "Let's call her," I said tightly. "We're settling this right now." I switched my phone to speaker, hit the record button, and dialed the number. After 2 rings, a raspy woman's voice answered. "This is Beatrice Smith." "Who's speaking?" "Hello, ma'am," I said evenly. "My name is Ethan Archer. I believe you recently matched with my daughter, Aubrey. She's 16. Records suggest you might be her paternal grandmother." Her tone immediately grew more serious. "Yes," she confirmed. "I had a son when I was 15. He was adopted and given the name Landon Bishop. My DNA results indicate Aubrey may be his daughter. Are you familiar with him?" A wave of nausea rolled through me. Landon Bishop, the district attorney, Gabrielle's boss. "I know him," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Beatrice coughed harshly. "I'm battling stage 4 lung cancer," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "Before I pass, I just want to meet my granddaughter." I swallowed thickly, feeling a bitter chill inside. So Gabrielle hadn't just been hiding an affair, this had ties reaching back years. "We'll set something up," I said smoothly, keeping my anger masked. "My parents have more flexibility. They can bring Aubrey to visit." "That would be wonderful, dear," Beatrice said, clearly exhausted. "Just send a notarized permission letter first. My attorney will need it for the DNA verification. There's a substantial inheritance involved." The call ended. My father stared down at the phone, stunned and pale. My mother dabbed at her eyes, tears spilling silently. I just sat motionless, the enormity of the situation pressing down on me. Gabrielle, not just deceit, but an entire secret existence. "Ethan," my father rasped, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "Does Gabrielle know about this?" I rubbed my chin thoughtfully. Maybe. Or maybe she just suspects Landon is Aubrey's biological father. Either way, I was determined to get to the truth. Outside my office, I handed the phone to Kendra. "Transcribe the call. Make several copies," I ordered. She blinked in surprise but quickly nodded. "Yes, sir." Not long after, I summoned Damien, my assistant manager, and his wife Charlotte into the office. Charlotte had known Gabriel since they were kids, although they had never been particularly close. I needed allies now. When the door closed behind them, I spoke in a low, deliberate voice. "Listen carefully. I believe Gabriel has had a relationship with Landon for years, maybe even before Aubrey was born. I need hard proof." Damien's brows knitted together. "You're actually serious, Ethan? We're talking about your wife here." I shot him a cold, humorless smile. "She's the one who suggested I fool around, completely out of nowhere." The whole thing felt wrong. Deep down, I sensed Gabrielle was trying to trap me, angling for evidence of an affair so she could wreck the marriage on her terms. If she could accuse me of cheating, she'd walk away with everything. Charlotte's face hardened. That's downright devious. But then again, Gabrielle had always loved being in control. She thrived on manipulating people. I could still remember how she used to humiliate classmates back in school. Yeah, I said with a sharp nod. I'm through letting her walk all over me. I looked at Damien. You'll start using the company truck on Thursday nights for the next 3 months. You'll handle the cross-state trips like I normally do. Charlotte, I'll need to borrow your car too. I'll drive it around to keep up appearances. Gabrielle needs to think everything's business as usual. She won't change her Thursday routine, and that's when I'll be watching. Charlotte leaned in, eyes gleaming. If you catch her in the act, tell me. I'll have the dispatcher send police to the scene under a fake emergency call. It'll be a public mess. A lot of cops can't stand Landon because of his harsh sentencing. I chuckled lowly. Genius. Excitement buzzed under my skin as I started assembling the final pieces of the plan. Thanks to Dale Britton, an ex-DA's office colleague of Landon's who now ran his own law firm and absolutely loathed him, I had the passcode to Landon's home security system. When Thursday came, I tailed Gabrielle using Charlotte's dented old Ford Taurus. She left her flashy SUV parked outside Charlie's Bar and Grill. Landon showed up soon after, dressed in a designer suit, and they tucked into steaks and wine like they were celebrating a victory. I stayed parked out of sight, catching snippets of them through the bar's tinted windows. After their meal, they left separately, but it didn't fool me. Gabrielle headed straight for Landon's house. I watched her key in the access code at the side door and slip inside like she owned the place. About 10 minutes later, Landon arrived. From a neighbor's house, a man who despised Landon for throwing his kid in jail, I had set up hidden cameras and microphones with a hired crew. The neighbor hated Landon enough to let us run the entire surveillance from his living room. Watching the live stream on my phone, I saw it all unfold. Inside Landon's living room, Gabrielle, her blouse hanging loose and no bra in sight, flung herself at him. Landon covered her with kisses, pressing her against the wall. Even through the passion, I caught that familiar haughty smirk of hers, the same superior tilt of her chin like she was doing Landon a favor. I had instructed my team to keep the footage suggestive but not graphic, making sure it stayed on the right side of legal. Then my phone buzzed. Charlotte had texted, "They're sending a prostitute after you tonight. Watch your back." I grinned to myself. Idiots. They really thought they could outmaneuver me? While Damien posed as a stranded motorist with a broken car on a back road, I crept up Landon's driveway and let the air out of all 4 tires, ensuring he was trapped there. Then I made the call. 2 police officers, both known for hating Landon, showed up at his door, sirens muted but lights flashing. They pounded on the door until Landon opened it, disheveled and shirtless, with Gabrielle peeking out behind him, clutching a sheet over herself. One of the officers barked, "Mrs. Gabrielle Archer? There's been a serious accident in Arkansas involving your husband, Ethan. We were told you might be found here. Your parents said to check this address." Gabrielle's knuckles whitened as she clutched the sheet tighter. I'm just visiting a friend," she stammered awkwardly. Landon tried to block her from sight. "She's leaving anyway," Landon muttered. "You can go." They tried to play it off with stiff, fake smiles. The officer, voice dripping with sarcasm, said, "You folks have a lovely night," sweeping his flashlight theatrically around the room. I captured everything from my hidden spot across the street. Perfect. They stood there, exposed and humiliated, half naked in flashing lights, broadcast live into a private Facebook group. The public shame alone was worth the months of plotting. Later that night, Gabrielle tried to come back home, but she couldn't even get inside. I had already changed the locks and filed a restraining order, all thanks to Dale's pull at the courthouse. Gabrielle made it to the front porch, rattled the locked doorknob, and eventually started pounding on the door, shrieking at the top of her lungs. I watched in silence from the upstairs window, lights off. Eventually, she called our eldest daughter, Alyssa, who sounded confused and distressed. A patrol car rolled up shortly after, and the officer warned Gabrielle she'd be breaking the restraining order if she didn't leave immediately. Seething with rage, she finally stormed off into the night. By the time the sun was up, I sat in the kitchen with Alyssa, Elliot, and Aubrey, flipping through TV channels when a breaking news alert blared across the screen. The local station's anchor announced District Attorney Landon Bishop and Mrs. Gabrielle Archer exposed live on social media during a heated rendezvous. Sources reported that the pair had plotted to frame Ethan Archer by hiring a prostitute in an attempt to rig divorce proceedings. The footage also confirmed that their affair had been ongoing for years. My children sat rigidly, their eyes locked onto the flickering screen where an old video clip played, the blurry figure of their mother draped in a ghostly white sheet. A reporter's voice delivered the grim story, the botched attempt to frame me, the prostitution scandal that had imploded, and the police intervention that had brought everything to light. 16-year-old Aubrey, always quick on the uptake, was the first to connect the dots. "Wait a second," she choked out. "It wasn't just an affair? She actually did all of this behind your back?" I dipped my head slowly, the picture of exhausted grief, though inside a thrill ran through me at how seamlessly the plan had worked. "Your mother made her choices," I said, pausing deliberately. "And there's more you need to hear. You're about to meet Landon's mother, your biological grandmother." "She's very ill," I continued, noting the confusion shadowing Aubrey's face. Alyssa and Elliot sat frozen beside her, too stunned to speak. "But Mom always said we were only yours," Elliot finally managed, his voice cracking. I rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Yes," she lied, I thought. "But you'll never grasp just how carefully I orchestrated it all. That weekend, our house overflowed with relatives offering condolences and support for me and the kids. Even Gabrielle's father, typically reserved and proud, joined me on the back porch, a half-empty beer dangling from his hand. His face sagged with guilt. "Ethan, I'm sorry," he rasped. "I never believed my daughter could be capable of such recklessness. She was always self-centered, but this—" He trailed off, too overwhelmed to continue. He blew out a long breath. "I don't blame you for cutting her off. I've barely exchanged words with her myself since everything came to light." I nodded, giving him a sorrowful smile, while inside, I savored the triumph of even turning her own family against her. "I never wanted it to come to this," I lied with ease. But she gave me no choice. Inside the house, Cora, Gabrielle's mother, shot a venomous glare at an old family portrait on the wall. "I warned her," she muttered, "told her to value what she had before she lost it, but her pride always got in the way." "This time she's gone too far," Gabrielle's father said grimly. "We're changing our will. What would have gone to Gabrielle is going to your kids instead, Ethan. I barely recognize her anymore." Across the room, I glimpsed Alyssa dabbing her eyes with a tissue. The air was thick with grief and resentment, and for a brief, flickering second, I almost felt sorry for Gabrielle. Almost. Meanwhile, Aubrey had gone with my parents across state lines to meet Beatrice Smith, Landon's mother. During their trip, my father called with an update. "Ethan," he said, "this Beatrice, she's a piece of work. Stage 4 lung cancer, but still full of life," he went on. "She shared stories about Landon's father, ended up in prison for murdering his mistress's husband. Sounds like Landon inherited some of that rage. But Beatrice really took a liking to Aubrey. They hit it off right away." He hesitated before dropping the real news. "Beatrice wants to settle her estate. She's making Aubrey the main beneficiary, and you'll manage the trust until she turns 25. Keeping my voice carefully measured, I replied, "That's very generous." "There's one other thing," he added. "She requested a DNA test. Results came back. No doubts. Landon is the biological father." Feigning astonishment, I said, "I see. Let's keep that information quiet until everything's finalized." "Understood," he agreed before ending the call. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples as a slow, triumphant smile spread across my face. Poor Gabrielle. Every lie she spun was unraveling spectacularly. As my kids grappled with the truth, Gabrielle's carefully constructed life was crumbling into dust. She tried to cling to normalcy with a shopping trip, but the real world hit her like a freight train. She adored her high-end labels, but the store manager refused to honor the employee discount she once flaunted. Another shopper sneered just loud enough for her to hear. Figures you'd end up a train wreck. 5 hours on Facebook Live, hooking up with your boss? How pathetic. Gabrielle fled the store in shame, fury boiling beneath the surface. She trudged back to Landon's place mid-afternoon, only to find the security codes had been changed. A note taped to the door referenced the new settings, a cruel reminder that the household assumed she was Landon's wife, not his disposable mistress. Rummaging through the day's mail, she stumbled upon the divorce papers I had filed. I was suing her for fraud, abandonment, adultery, and defamation. If the judge sided with me, the damages would destroy whatever financial stability she and Landon had left. Trembling, she opened a letter I'd handwritten myself. Gabrielle, you tried to ruin me, convinced I was too naive to see through your games. You blamed me for every unhappiness in your life, pretending I forced you into a dead-end marriage. If you despised me so much, why didn't you leave? Because Landon, your precious Landon, never wanted the burden of family. Not even his own. You spun a web of lies and publicly humiliated me for years, thinking I was blind. You ridiculed me in front of our children, turned them into pawns for your manipulations. Now they know the truth. Now everyone does. And when you reach out for support, you'll find nothing waiting for you but the ruins you built with your own hands. If you're in the mood, keep laughing it up with Landon. Raise a glass to your so-called victory, or take a good look at the wreckage you've caused. Word had it, Ethan, that she broke down crying after reading it, but I didn't have it in me to feel sorry. It was 3 full days before Gabrielle finally mustered the nerve to return to the family home and retrieve her things. I suspected she might come without notice, so I made sure to prepare another harsh lesson in advance. That evening, I was sprawled out on the couch, phone in hand, while Elliot and Alyssa busied themselves clattering around the kitchen. Outside, tires crunched along the gravel drive, followed by the jiggling of the front doorknob and sharp knocking. Gabrielle's voice cut through the door. "Open up. I need to get my stuff." I rose from the couch, motioning for Elliot to stay back. Luckily, Aubrey wasn't home. She didn't need to see what was about to happen. I quickly phoned the police dispatcher, keeping my voice low. "She's here," I murmured. "The restraining order's still in effect. You know the protocol." "Understood, sir. Officers are on their way." I cracked the door open just enough for the chain to hold. Through the narrow opening, Gabrielle glared at me, her face lit with a twisted sort of confidence. "Let me in, Ethan," she snapped, "or I'll break a window." I met her stare with cold indifference. "You're not allowed within 500 feet of me or the kids, Gabrielle. That includes this property." She smacked the door with her palm. "That restraining order was a rush job and you know it," she spat. "Let me in. I still have ownership rights here." I gave her a cold laugh. "Not for much longer. Walk away now before you make things worse for yourself." Right on cue, 2 police cruisers pulled into the drive, red and blue lights flashing across the twilight. The officers jumped out, issuing orders. Gabrielle spun to face them, wild-eyed. "What is this?" she shrieked. "You can't just lock me out of my own house." One of the officers advanced toward her. "Mrs. Archer, you've been formally served. Being here violates the court order. You need to leave now." Gabrielle's expression twisted with fury. "That's my house, my kids. He's the one who's manipulating everyone. You're all blind." The officer's voice sharpened. "Ma'am, settle down. If you don't comply, we'll have no choice but to arrest you." "I want my clothes," she cried, her voice cracking, the edge of defiance giving way to desperation. I stayed leaning casually in the doorway, watching. "Officers," I said in my most faux magnanimous voice, "she can take one small suitcase, but only from the porch. She's not setting foot inside." Gabrielle's eyes burned with hatred, but she finally jerked her head in a stiff nod. "Fine. One suitcase. Then I'm gone." I shut the door and headed upstairs, grabbed an old battered suitcase from the closet, and carelessly stuffed it with some ragged sweatpants, a threadbare t-shirt, and assorted cheap toiletries, nothing of real importance. Carrying it downstairs, I dropped it on the porch with a thud. "This should do," I said flatly. Gabrielle looked at me like I was some kind of monster. "You love hurting me, don't you?" she hissed. I tilted my head slightly. "No, Gabrielle. I just take pleasure in revealing the truth behind your lies." Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them spill. She snatched the suitcase, spun around, and stalked back to her car, 2 officers following close behind. I stepped back inside. Alyssa stood frozen in the hallway, her eyes wide. I closed and locked the door behind me, exhaling slowly, my heartbeat steady with satisfaction at how perfectly the plan had unfolded. 2 days later, Gabrielle's parents decided it was time to confront her face to face. I learned about it when my father-in-law called to give me a heads up. "Ethan," he said, "we're finally meeting with Gabrielle after all that's gone down. She asked for it. We want to see if there's any remorse left, or if she's still drowning in her own lies." I had an idea of my own. Quietly, I tipped off a local journalist, hoping they might catch sight of the meeting and add a little public pressure to Gabrielle's growing disaster. The meeting place was Beans and Roasts, a sleepy little cafe near the courthouse. It was a quiet time of day. Only a few scattered patrons lingered at their tables. Gabrielle arrived wearing dark sunglasses and her hair wound tight into a severe bun, an attempt to hide the damage. Her parents were seated by the front window. As soon as she slid into the booth, her father leaned in. "Gabrielle, we are devastated by what you've done. How can you possibly explain the pain you've brought on this family? Your children are heartbroken." Slowly, Gabrielle pulled down her sunglasses, her face stony and unreadable. "Don't pretend you're saints," she said coldly. "You're the ones who insisted on taking the kids every other weekend. Maybe if they'd stayed with me full time, I wouldn't have had so much free time to drift. Ever think of that?" Her mother gasped in shock. "How dare you blame us? You had a loving home with Ethan, children who adored you. You threw all of it away for Landon, that pitiful excuse of a man, just to chase some fantasy where you answer to no one." Gabrielle's jaw tightened. "You don't understand anything. You've spent years idolizing Ethan, but he's not the caring, gentle father you all want him to be. He pulls the strings from behind the scenes, steering everything without anyone noticing. He set me up." Her father slammed his hand against the table, rattling their coffee cups. "You shouldn't have handed him the ammunition," he snapped. "If you'd had an ounce of integrity, he wouldn't have had anything to use against you." "Don't blame him for the choices you made with Landon," her father continued. "Did Ethan force you into bed with him?" Gabrielle's cheeks burned crimson. A few older women sitting nearby gasped aloud at the crude accusation. Her mother added icily, "We saw the footage, Gabrielle. You practically put on a show." Her voice was void of any sympathy. "You can't undo it now." Gabrielle's glare could have set the entire cafe on fire, her eyes shimmering with rage. "Now I see exactly where your loyalty lies," she spat. "I never intended for it to spiral like this. Ethan is behind all these traps. I just wanted to make sure I could leave the marriage on my own terms, but now he's turned it all against me." Her father shoved back his chair and stood abruptly. "We're done here," he said coldly. "I don't even recognize who you've become." Pointing a firm finger at her, he added, "Don't call unless it's to apologize to your children." Without another glance, he and her mother exited the cafe. Gabrielle sat paralyzed as the small crowd around her buzzed with whispered gossip. A freelance reporter from a local news station, who had caught the tail end of the confrontation on camera, eagerly recorded the scene. Shame twisted Gabrielle's features. She ripped off her sunglasses, hurled them onto the table, and stormed out. A week later, Aubrey returned home from her stay with Grandma Beatrice. There was a new quietness to her, a thoughtful air she hadn't had before. My parents were with her. The moment Aubrey stepped through the doorway, she rushed into my arms. For a fleeting second, I dropped the mask I always wore, letting real affection shine through. "How was your trip?" I asked. Aubrey said Grandma Beatrice had been welcoming, had spoken openly about Landon's violent history, and reassured her that none of what happened was her fault. "We had some really good talks," she said softly. "She told me never to let other people's mistakes define who I am." I gave her a gentle pat on the back, keeping my voice calm and fatherly. "That's good to hear," I replied. Later that evening, Aubrey pulled me aside. "Dad," she began carefully, "I know you're angry at Mom for what happened, but sometimes it feels like you're purposely pushing all the right buttons to destroy her." Her voice trembled slightly. "I don't really pity her," she added, "but part of me feels uneasy." She looked up at me, her voice smaller now. "You're my dad, but sometimes you scare me too." I raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm being unfair after everything she's done?" I asked. Aubrey gave a tiny shrug. "I think you like having control over everything," she said quietly. Her gaze, so much like Gabrielle's, only steadier and sadder, locked onto mine without blinking. I chuckled softly, the sound tightly controlled. "I'm just trying to protect what's left of this family," I said. Aubrey hesitated, then gave a small nod before heading off to bed. But I saw it, the lingering doubt clouding her eyes. It didn't matter, though. Her misgivings weren't going to stop the legal firestorm already engulfing Gabrielle. 2 months later, my legal assault against Gabrielle and Landon was fully armed and ready. Fraud, emotional deception, falsified paternity, and emotional abuse aimed at me and the kids. I had brought in the best, Dale Britton, Landon's old enemy, a man who had every reason to want vengeance. It was a flawless setup. Behind closed doors, Dale revealed his personal stake in the matter. "Landon screwed me out of a fortune years ago," Dale said with a grim smile. "I've been waiting a long time for this. And your charming wife made it so much easier by forging hospital paternity records," he added, almost gleeful. "She's finished." I stared at him, stunned. "She actually forged them?" I asked. Dale nodded enthusiastically. "I've got a source who pulled Aubrey's birth files," he said. "Landon's name was buried under sealed adoption-style paperwork. No father's signature anywhere. Gabrielle set it all up to make it look like you were the biological dad. Textbook fraud." Flooded by these revelations, my mind flashed back to the footage from my hidden cameras. Gabrielle pushing Landon against the hallway wall inside his home, her blouse slipping down one shoulder, his hands roaming her body. I remembered hearing her mocking whisper, "He's so clueless." She had sneered before they kissed, her mouth curled into a wicked smile. Landon's words were muffled by the rustling of their clothes, but one chilling line stood out. "As soon as he screws up, we'll bury him. Then we'll be free." Gabrielle had laughed, hooking her leg around Landon's waist. The video didn't show anything explicit, but it captured enough. The easy intimacy, the careless betrayal. The memory alone rekindled my determination to crush them both. Saturday came, and Gabrielle's relatives swarmed into my home, demanding explanations. They packed into my living room, voices rising. One of her cousins snapped, "Ethan, is this really true? Gabrielle's name is being dragged through the mud. Did you really have to make it so public?" I shrugged without emotion. "She didn't leave me much choice," I said bluntly. "She wasn't exactly trying to keep it hidden, was she?" Gabrielle's aunt glared at me, her eyes filled with fury. "You're not just leaving her," she accused. "You're obliterating her. You could have ended this quietly." Before I could reply, my teenage son, Elliot, jumped in, his voice cutting through the noise. "She humiliated us first," he said fiercely. "She lied about who my sister's real father is. She tried to destroy Dad's life. She tore everything apart." He shook his head in disgust. "Don't expect Dad to show her any mercy now." Their silence fell instantly, thick and suffocating. After a few strained beats, they drifted away without a word. I stayed behind, slowly rotating my glass of water between my hands, feeling a grim, hollow satisfaction settle in. Even Gabrielle's extended family had finally stopped making excuses for her. On a regular Friday night, Gabrielle and Landon once again tried to have dinner at Charlie's. The restaurant gradually emptied out around them. People stared, whispered, pointed. The waitress approached without even pretending to be discreet. "We had a full list," she said bluntly. "But once folks realized you two were here, they chose to eat somewhere else. They've seen the video. They've read Ethan's letter." Fuming, Gabrielle threw a fistful of cash onto the table and stormed toward the door, Landon scrambling to follow. Right at the entrance, they ran into her parents, who were waiting to be seated. Gabrielle attempted to patch things up. "Mom, Dad, she started, but her father cut her off sharply, his eyes drilling into Landon. "Mr. Bishop," he hissed, "get away from me. You've ruined my daughter." Not that she needed much help. Gabrielle's mother didn't even look at her. "You're no longer part of this family," she said, her voice cold as ice. Crushed, Gabrielle staggered into the night, tears streaming down her face. Landon tried to reach out, but she slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me," she barked, before collapsing into uncontrollable sobs right there in the parking lot. Weeks slipped by, and then months. Gabrielle kept reaching out to the kids, trying to rebuild something. Alyssa blocked her number. Elliot hung up without a word as soon as he heard her voice. Aubrey didn't respond at all. Meanwhile, Landon struggled to keep his federal job in St. Louis as the county pressed him to repay tens of thousands in restitution. They were forced to sell off their luxury cars, trade down to a cramped two-bedroom rental, and brace themselves for the fraud trial ahead. If I prevailed, Missouri law would leave them with just $10 each to their names. One afternoon, Aubrey, who had barely shown emotion since her grandmother's death, came to me. "Dad," she said steadily, "we need a meeting. I want them to see Grandma's will. I want them to understand exactly what they've lost." Dale arranged it, a room with clear glass walls, sunlight flooding in. Gabrielle arrived wearing a cheap, poorly fitted suit. Landon looked drained, battered. Their attorneys seemed barely able to keep it together. Aubrey sat next to me, composed and resolute. She locked eyes on Landon. "I know about your father," she said quietly. "Grandma told me everything. You pushed Mom aside. I was just a hurdle to you." Gabrielle opened her mouth to protest. "Aubrey, that's not—" Aubrey cut her off with a razor-sharp voice. "Stop. You both lied. You lied to me, to Dad, to everyone, just to chase your future with Landon." Dale slid an envelope across the table toward them. Beatrice's final will, every single cent left to Aubrey. Once Grandma uncovered the truth about Gabrielle's betrayal, she had rewritten everything. Aubrey looked at Landon with a calm, brutal finality. "You both lose," she said, her voice flat. "You mean nothing to me." Gabrielle's voice cracked into a desperate whisper. "We can fix this," she begged. Aubrey's eyes were cold, unforgiving. "There's nothing left to fix." Landon's jaw tightened with rage. My pulse thundered in my ears. It was the perfect conclusion to everything. Gabrielle and Landon ended up ruined, bankrupted by spiraling legal bills and court-mandated repayments. Their reputations were obliterated, their names dragged through the mud as lawsuit after lawsuit, masterminded by my attorney Dale, piled onto them. Gabrielle continued trying to reconnect with our children, Alyssa, Elliot, and Aubrey, but they had severed ties for good. Even Gabrielle's wider family had turned away from her, blaming her arrogance and deceit for everything that had fallen apart. Meanwhile, waves of support flooded in for me from the community. The local paper published the open letter I had written to Gabrielle, only deepening the public's sympathy for my side and sharpening their disdain for hers. Aubrey's final words to Landon cut like a blade. "You're nothing." And from that moment on, we moved forward, stronger than ever. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you like this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.